I'm so excited though to talk today with these amazing fantasy authors. I do want to say, just because this is a fantasy panel, doesn't mean that that's all they write. A ton of authors that we have here write in multiple genres. So, they're not pigeonholed into that one genre. All right, so first things first, I would love to have the authors go down the line and introduce yourself and talk about what you write. Renee?
I am Renee Dugan. I write epic and romantic fantasy, and typically try to lean into stuff that's more like high fantasy, like Tolkien, C.S. Lewis. A lot of my inspiration came from there.
I'm Cassidy Clarke, and I forgot to not go that close. And I am pigeonholed into that one genre. I mostly just write fantasy. But yeah, I wrote The Saltwater Air, which I usually pitch as like a Throne of Glass meets Tangled from Disney. I grew up with a lot of like Lost Princess stories, lots of Disney, lots of Narnia, like C.S. Lewis, Tolkien. So all the swords, all the magic, and all the fun stuff.
Hi everybody, I am Chris Hamilton. I am a Christian fiction author. I like to tell people I do Christian fiction a little bit different because it's not going to be, the Hallmark kind of thing over and over again. It's going to be an excellent story no matter what. I do write across genres, but fantasy is my bread and butter. Fellow Narnian, yes, absolutely. And I have a little bit of everything today, so really excited.
Thanks. And I'm EA Logan. I write a lot about vampires. I like a lot of dark fantasy. I like mystery. I'm a cross-genre author as well. And I collaborate with Chris on a vampire book. So.
And I'm John Kowalski, and I write Christian fantasy too, a little bit differently than my fellow authors here. But there is that C.S. Lewis type of feel to it with the portal fantasy type feel. My book, though, is a little different, where they go to a fantasy world that's experiencing a version of the Old Testament of the Bible. So it kind of mixes that fantasy aspect with some historical fiction.
All right, and Renee, you get the first question. Okay, we're going into it. All right, so the two main love interests in the story, Squid and Scarlet, which I absolutely love, they have such excellent banter. I was laughing out loud like multiple times. They have really great tension too. How do you create that kind of dynamic between two characters?
Well, firstly, being in a flirtationship with my husband for many years before we actually got together helped a lot. But also just, I really find that what I write, I need to read in order to get kind of the rhythm in my head. So actually, ironically, reading a lot of Cassidy's books taught me a lot about how to write banter and kind of what the cadence is for that. And keeping the tension up was just a matter really in that particular book about knowing that the characters had secrets and had insecurities, and just kind of trying to think like, how far do you have to get into a relationship before you're willing to reveal those parts of yourself that you're scared of other people seeing? And so I tried to keep in mind how long they had been traveling together, what they had experienced together, and just trying to stay sensitive to how close they were becoming in order to begin to switch that kind of like tension between them into attraction tension into, what eventually became their love story.
I love that you were inspired by Cassidy's books. That's so cute. All right, well, my next question is for Cassidy. Also, she watched The Mummy like a lot. So. I do. So if you guys haven't stopped by Renee's table, and I haven't already told you because I tell a lot of people, I love A Story Spun Scarlet so much that I do have the first line tattooed on my arm. It is one of my 2 tattoos, so you know that I actually really do like. This is so good. Okay, so Cassidy writes incredibly in-depth characters who really feel like they're people that you know. What is your process for developing characters process, if we can call it a process, chaos is a process of some kind. So a lot of the time they will kind of come into my head like somewhat like already having a personality, a name, like all of those things. But a lot of it is Pinterest, Pinterest boards, like trying to find some inspiration there. A lot of it is character playlists, where like if I find particular songs that really, like music's a really big part of my process for everything, but especially like finding the core of characters. And then a lot of it honestly is giving them pieces of people that I love or like people that I am, and kind of like doling out little pieces of that into other people to make them really feel real. And then as far as who I'm most like, honestly, so my favorite character is Fenton, who is kind of like if you had like Loki meets like Kaz from Six of Crows meets like Jaskier from The Witcher, like all smashed into one person. But he has a lot of the same habits and mannerisms and stuff, or like and weirdness that I do. So I put a lot of myself into him, I think, out of everybody.
I love Fenton. Yeah.
He's my boy.
Yeah. All right. For Chris, I really love that Eastern Tales is about two best friends trying to pay off their college tuition, because who isn't? How do you translate real life experiences into the fantasy genre?
That's a lot of fun to try and do in process. I always say it like this, like when you're writing fantasy, it should be high level enough that you can have the same themes that people can relate to. And when you dial down to the detail level, that's where you have, your fantasy setting. I've never had to like pick up a sword and defend my hometown from orcs or dragons or anything like that. I'm kind of slacking, sorry, but like Easter Tales, a lot of that was inspiration about my life, just trying to pay for college and trying to make ends meet, trying to figure out who you are in life. There's a little bit about, you have characters running from law, they're in a sham trial. You have a lot of people who look like me who have, faced the legal system and kind of been through something like that. So just taking it as high a level as you can get where people can still connect to it, but then just filling the details when you're down to the, detail level.
Awesome. All right. EA.
Yes.
Your book series, Odium, is about a young woman discovering that vampires exist, which is always one of my favorite types of stories, honestly. Vampires are great. Why did you decide to write about vampires? And can you talk about any other vampire media or stories that inspired you?
Yeah, vampires have always been a thing for me. Ever since I was a really little kid, it started when my cousins were watching the Buffy the Vampire Slayer movie. So this is way back in the early 90s. And then like I was a kid, I should not have been watching that movie, but I saw vampires and that's all I saw, and I was like, those are cool. And as I got older, I always liked to write, and I wrote a ton of vampire stories all through like grade school, middle school, high school. And so Odium was a book that I started writing actually in high school, and it's gone through so many iterations. So a big part of that was Buffy. I had the comics for that. I also used to read like a ton of other vampire books, a lot of vampire stories from the internet. Most of it was actually stories that people have written and posted online. A lot of that stuff, a lot of indie writing was actually a huge inspiration for me. Not so much a lot of published work, but there is one like romance novel writer that I read a lot in high school. And it's kind of funny, so it's Amanda Ashley, and she kind of has like the same vampire like reincarnation story, but in high school that was a huge thing for me. So that was actually, a lot of that was like the foundation, but as I've gotten older, there have been other like vampire books, because that's just my thing. I just think they're so cool.
I love that indie writers inspired you. That's awesome. Yeah, that's wonderful. All right, and then for John, your book, Heavenly Places, places normal people into the fantasy world of Aramor, is that what it is?
Aramor.
Aramor? I'm so good at this. a world of, that has, swords and sorcery and magic. How do you decide what type of setting to choose for your book?
That's an interesting question because the books, the stories started in a role-playing game. It started in Dungeons and Dragons. Yeah.
He's a master. What's your title with?
I'm a professional dungeon master online. I run games for kids and adults. I run about 12 to 15 games a week. Yeah, so I've got a lot of worlds in my head, not just Aramore. But yeah, it started as that. So I created the world because it needed to be different to accommodate the faith-based aspect of it. So I created the world, and then the characters kind of created themselves through the group, right? So my daughter back there is one of the characters, and the character is somewhat her, but somewhat not her, because that's the whole point of role-playing games, is to not be you, right?
Yep.
To be someone else for a little while. So that's kind of how that all came about.
I love that. You mentioned D&D, so I want to get into the other question I have for you. How does D&D affect your storytelling abilities?
I think the fact that I played D&D since I was in middle school, it just amped up my creative brain to the point where I just see everything as story opportunities. There are things that happen in all my games every week that I try to incorporate into the writing in some way in the story. It has to make sense in the story as well, of course, but it's just such D&D is such a genre of creativity that I never know where it's gonna go, and I'm running the game, right? And I love that about it, especially playing with kids. They are so imaginative that they surprise me every time, and I love it. Yeah.
That's awesome with kids.
Yeah.
Kids are so much fun. The imaginations they have.
They are.
All right. So my next question is for E.A. Logan and Chris. So they wrote a book together. I would love to hear you two talk about that. And so one of my favorite things about vampires is that a lot of the themes are always about greed, desire, because they have like the bloodlust, and also about acceptance because they're struggling to deal with who they are now. So how did you explore those themes in a book, and also just what was it like to co-write a book?
Oh, this is gonna be fun. Okay, so Vampire's Couch is the one that we collaborated on, and this is the first of the trilogy. I'm gonna just start in on the theme with greed, and I can't remember the second one, but desire, greed and desire. So one of the characters in there, his name's Ambrose. I got to write him, and Ambrose, he embraces that. He doesn't care. He embraces greed, he embraces desire, he's very selfish, but he's a fun character to read because he kind of ignores that shame that most people have associated with that, where it's like, oh, I shouldn't do that. He's like, no, I know other people do that, so why should I hide that I do it? So Ambrose, he embraces it, whereas, actually I should probably just hand this off to you. We can go back and forth on Elias.
For sure. Yeah, dialing back a little bit to the audio series, I was a recent reader for that. I think a couple years ago I picked that up, and I loved it. I read pretty much everything she has written for it. And when I decided I wanted to do a vampire series of my own, we collaborated to get on the Vampire's Couch up. And the story, it centers on Elias. He's the main character. He was turned into a vampire to fight off Spanish invaders, but it didn't work. So the story kind of follows him throughout the decades, trying to live a normal, peaceful life. And he's the character that embodies the whole, is guilt over doing something you have to do. And when things aren't, clear cut, black and white, do this or don't do this. He obviously has to drink blood to survive, or he starves, and he loses control, ends up hurting people. So showing that aspect from him. And I had put Ambrose in there. He started as a side character, actually. Just kind of an antithesis of what Elias was going through. And We loved him so much, so like all the test readers, E.A. Logan loved him so much, like he became his own character. But I'm actually kind of glad it turned out that way because you have that back and forth dynamic throughout the entire book. You have Elias who goes to the very edge of like existence, trying to not drink blood, trying to not hurt anybody, and he ends up losing control, loses his couch, loses a friend, and Ambrose is there. He's we like to call him Morgan Gray. He says what Elias needs to hear, but it's not always like a positive message and a positive way he delivers it. So it's a lot of banter. It's really fun.
We all know those kinds of people.
Oh yeah.
We all know those kinds of people.
Real quick, one note on that. So the collaboration part of that, collaborating is really fun. So we do a lot of workshopping of our writing together, and so collaboration just kind of became a natural thing. It just kind of clicked, and we oftentimes, whenever we're writing, I often find that either he is reading my mind, what I'm trying to say and can't say, or vice versa. So collaboration just works really well between us, where we'll start reading something and then like we're going through, we're trying to edit it, or we're trying to work on a certain piece to get it better, and then the other person will be like, hey, what if we did this? So I think collaboration is just like, it just naturally happens.
Definitely agree with that.
Also, sorry, can you two show off the backs of your shirts as well?
Oh, yeah.
Pretty please, because this is perfect time and it needs to happen. Look at that. Awesome. You guys should have matching shirts.
Not yet.
Not yet. All right. My next question is for Cassidy. So in the saltwater air and in your whole saga, it deals with wars between different countries. How do you develop different kingdoms and governments? Does it take a lot of time? Does it come easy to you? What's that like?
It definitely takes a lot of time, just like kind of figuring out how each individual kingdom would be different based on location or like what they value and like what they deem important. So I usually, with the saltwater air specifically, I usually start with like kind of a specific theme. So like there's Arboreus, which is based mostly like, it's like a forest kingdom. So it's like, well, they would, like they're, sorry, I'm blanking. It kind of goes off of like a lot of figuring out their way of speaking, like their pattern of speech. So it's like, what idioms would they use? What curses would they use? What resources and would they value, and what would they not have that they would need from other kingdoms, and therefore which ones are they allied with? And that kind of thing. So like there's Arboreus, that's the forest kingdom. There's Talus, that's very much like mountain based. Atlas is where we are in the saltwater air, and that's all ocean, beach, that kind of thing. So I kind of start with like just an idea of like okay, this is this kingdom, this is what this is, and then work off of it from there, and they become like, they kind of grow into real places and like kind of sprout their own silly little quirks and all kinds of stuff. So it's been really fun to explore it.
It's fun. What one would you want to live in?
So Atlas is very heavily based on like the aesthetic of it is kind of like Greek based, but a lot of the actual like meat of it is very much based on Naples, Florida, which is where like my aunt lives. And I go there like once a year. The beach is stunning. Like the sunsets are so insane that people will applaud. Like they stay and watch it and then they applaud after. And it's just the most magical thing. So a lot of Atlas has a lot of that texture, and it's a place that I really love. So I would say probably Atlas, but Nyx, which is like the snow night, like whatever kingdom, that's a lot of based in Michigan. Because it's cold and it's icy, but like it's also cozy. Like Michigan winters are very cozy, it's still, and very whatever, but they're also kind of harsh. So it's like, I put some home in there, but I put some like wish fulfillment home in that one. Home away from home in Atlas.
I never knew that this was based off of our wonderful state here.
Yeah, lots of snow.
Yeah. All right, and then for Renee, I think one of the most exciting things about reading fantasy is the world building and the magic system. So can you please tell us about how you develop your magic system and explain how it works?
Sure. So, A Story Spun in Scarlet is very unique. I'm usually very much an elemental-based magic writer. Like, I love elemental-based magic. I grew up playing Final Fantasy games, so that kind of magic has always been where I felt most comfortable. For A Story Spun in Scarlet, it actually came about very differently. The magic system is built off of storytelling itself, and that came about because I had several years of really bad writer's block. And I didn't know how to get through it, and so I finally gave up on all the other stories I was trying to tell and said, I'm gonna write a story where the magic comes from stories and the magic is gone, and no one can end their stories. And so that became the launching point. And then just going back and seeing how like readers were impacted by my books, my friends' books, like made me realize how much power there is in storytelling. And then what would that look like if you made it into sort of, I guess you could say, like a practical magic system. And so then you have like, when you tell in this world stories at the height of their power, they can create things. So not living things, but they can create, a house. You can help water crops. You can create clothing and and textiles and things that people need to survive. And then to take that and break it down and go, so what happens when that resource is gone? And it was really fun to get to explore, like when you're in a world where everybody's become very reliant on that form of power and the people who bring it, then what happens when it's gone? How are those people seen? And how do you survive without that power in your midst anymore?
How do you survive? I wrote a book, I know, but. All right, and then my next question is for John and Chris. So as, the Christian fantasy authors that we are very, very happy to have here, can you talk about how faith plays a role in your writing? And how do you think that religion and fantasy go well together? Because some people might not think that they do, but they actually do.
Yeah, I grew up in the Satanic Panic era.
Yes.
So when D&D first came out, people thought it was evil. But things aren't evil. People can be, but things cannot be. Concepts cannot be evil. Only people can truly make them evil. So my whole basis for the book, the first book, the subtitle is Coram Deo. And that's a theological idea that means before the face of God. So when I write, I'm thinking about the fact that I'm before God always, right? He can see me, he can see what I'm doing. He's speaking into my life no matter what I'm doing, whether I'm at work, whether we're at school, whether we're writing a book or doing anything, even going to church. God is speaking into that in some way. So the idea for me to write these books and to play this D&D version, faith-based D&D version, is to live that out, to just be faithful and give glory to God no matter what I do. And that's really the basis for the characters as well in the book, because they get transported to a different world that makes no sense to them whatsoever, except for the tides. They're recognizing, hey, we know what's happening here. It's not happening exactly the same way that it did in the Bible because it's a different world, but they have to react in the same way, or they choose to, I should say. They don't have to, but they choose to behave coram deo, as if they're before the face of God. So that's how it kind of all ties together.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Like, I definitely feel that in my writing too. There's also a personal story I like to tell. 5th grade, I believe I was. We were towards the end of the school year, and we decided to watch The Hobbit, the cartoon movie from like the 80s, I think it was. It was way back there. Yep, and I told my mom about it on the way home because we were going to start the next day. And she said, absolutely not. You know, fantasy is not part of our religion. We don't do that. You're going to sit in the hall while they're watching that movie. And, you know, I did. I wouldn't say it like traumatized or anything. I enjoyed it as much as a kid would enjoy sitting in the hall, but you know, that was kind of my thing. That was my experience with the fantasy world and growing up in a Christian household. And a couple years later, Peter Jackson, the Lord of the Rings trilogy came out. And the first one was in theaters, and we were at a family dinner, and we were all excited about it. And my mom mentioned that we weren't going to see it because of Christian beliefs. And my aunt and uncle who were there, they were also youth ministers in their church at the time. They told her, like, no, Lord of the Rings is an allegory for Christianity, and were able to break it down to her. And to my mom's credit, she heard that new information and she changed her mind, which a lot of Christian families don't actually do that. So I got to see the movie in theaters, and then I got the box set for Christmas that year. So it was awesome. It's still one of my favorite book sets ever. But doing all that, I said that to say that that taught me how to make allegory. So if you have a different setting that seems, you know, counter to your faith and whatnot, how do you tie your faith into that? How do you tie your faith into that kind of story? And that's kind of what I did with Eastern Tales. I picked one aspect of faith, specifically the commandment, thou shalt not kill. I tried to explore okay, first of all, how would you approach that if you didn't have faith? Like, how would a person who doesn't have Judeo-Christian beliefs, you know, approach the topic of taking a life? And from there, we were just able to kind of go on to the whole, it's a huge part of the book, but just being able to take an aspect of faith and break it down and explore different angles to it. Like, what if you don't believe? Is it still valuable? What if you have no choice but to do this thing? So just kind of taking piece by piece and spreading it over the story there is kind of my approach. So.
That's really good, because I think a lot of people think that religion, well, I guess it can feel all encompassing, and it can feel like a lot, so
Sure.
piece by piece is a really good way to approach that.
Yep, absolutely. Because again, no matter where you are in faith, you can always find common ground. You know, that's been my experience, especially having friends in church, friends out of church. There's always common ground. There's always commonality. There's always things that everybody deals with. So.
All right, so at this point, I would love to open it up to questions from the audience. Next question? Yes, go ahead.
So does any of your books, you have it on an audiobook version, and if not, how would you possibly pursue that, or are you pursued to do that? We have visited Brilliance audiobooks up in the western part of the state here, so that's where they're located, and that's why I'm asking the question. Because I'm an audiobook consumer, I have no time to great question. I can take that one.
Yeah, hi, EA Logan here. Mercury's Crypt, actually, this is the Hero's Journey month. This one's actually on audiobook as well. And that's because it was in budget, because it's a 70-page book. So, so I did that, and I did that through ACX. And I worked with Jerry Maynard, who is a voice actor found online. He was great to collaborate with. But I did that, and I kind of had him walk me through that because I had no idea what I was doing. I was like, hey, Jerry, what do I do? How do I do this? How do I get it done? And through ACX, you have to do kind of like a proposal thing where you put up what you're willing to pay, and then if they accept it, you also can do how the payment works, and that's kind of how that worked. I don't know about other platforms. I know there's a ton of other ones, but yeah, I'd be willing to look at other ones too, because I know he actually has left ACX because he didn't like where they were going with AI, which is fair.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
that's another time.
Completely fair. I think I got our AI policy and all of it, yeah.
I just wanted to add to that. I also I'm avid in trying to put my books on audiobook because I know that it's an accessibility thing, and also as a mom myself, I know that there are seasons of life where you just can't sit down and read, a book that you're holding in your hands. So actually, I went a similar route with my flagship series, the Star Chaser Saga, where I went through ACX and collaborated with somebody there, which was a really great experience, but also had some ups and downs in the series is incomplete because just, things sometimes come up with narrators, and so I actually got a different narrator for A Story Spun in Scarlet, who I found through social media. And she has been wildly fantastic and is actually working on making a full cast audiobook for the second book. And so, but I will say, I think the biggest struggle with audiobooks for authors, and I don't want to speak for everybody, but I know for myself, is there can be a big barrier because of cost.
So you have to put up the cost of that. It's not like a publisher will say I do want to put this in audiobook form.
Yes, and
Wow.
ACX does make it, they have one policy of theirs that I do enjoy is they offer a royalty share program where you don't have to front the bill up front, but you do have to split the royalties that come in for, I believe it's the first 7 years or
I
something.
think something like that.
Yeah, so for 7 years, I'll get a cut of the audiobooks and my narrator will get a cut and then ACX gets the rest of it. So thankfully there are ways that it's a little more inclusive for authors, but it can definitely be a hurdle because of the price point.
That's a great question.
That's why I pay for all my audiobooks. Yep.
That's awesome. Okay. So we'll come back to audience questions in a second, but Logan mentioned reviewing script, and it got me thinking. One question I have for Logan, but I actually want to ask it to everyone. So in that book, the main character, Mika, she has powers because of her birthright. She's a necromancer, right? Yep. So I would love to hear what everyone thinks about inherited powers versus powers that are sought out.
All right, so inherited versus powers that are sought out. I feel like there's room to get creative with both of them. I specifically picked birthright powers because I wanted a chosen one trope for my hero's journey. It just kind of brought everything together. But I feel like both of those, you can do so much with both of them. I think it just kind of falls into what you want to do with your story. It depends on how you're trying to weave your story, I guess, and what your characters, what their purpose is in the story. That's it. I'm gonna pass this to you.
Okay. Mine's a little different because it doesn't really happen either way. They don't seek after their powers. At least the people that come through the portal from Earth, they're given avatar bodies. They are input into bodies that have abilities that they need. But they meet along the way a lot of characters who are from that world, who then join them on this mission, this calling, so to speak, and they have more birthright powers. They either inherited or developed those powers through their lives. So it's very different, and there's a couple of different ways that the people who are portaled in from Earth get their powers, or their kind of avatar bodies, and I don't want to go too far into that because it's kind of a little bit of a twist in the third book. So I don't want to give that away, but there is a difference between some of them that were brought there and others that were brought there a different way.
Yeah, I'll kind of use this moment to make a shameful plug for my next book. The prequel to Eastern Tales is coming out in November, but you deal a little bit with that in this book, and the next book goes a lot more into it, but in this world, some people have inborn magical powers. It's just a part of the human design. And some people get powers by essentially selling their souls. So, it's really cool to write that back and forth dynamic to see the difference between those. But I think as far as a narrative perspective, I would probably prefer the inborn powers that you're actually born with, because it has lots of characters, and I think you can do more with it, at least in my experience, but
So in my series, I would say there are mostly, I think there's probably a good balance between some things where there is like inherited power or like developed power, or there is power in certain artifacts that they have to recover, or like power that they kind of have to seek after. I think the narrative advantage with inborn or like inherited power is that with sought after power, I think that there's a little more consideration you have to pay to like cost of pursuing that, or the consequence, kind of like weighing the cost versus reward of that, and like really making sure that's woven into the narrative in order to like up the conflict and the stakes and everything. Whereas with inherited power, I still think that you need to have some limitations on that, otherwise you end up with, what's the phrase I'm trying to think of? Where they're like, overpowered. You end up with like overpowered, invincible characters, and then you are back into a corner because, well, nobody can defeat these people, so how do I keep the stakes high? But particularly with power that is being sought for, I feel like you have to really weave the stakes of that into things, whereas with inherited power, I think it's a little more loosey-goosey. Like, it's usually not as much the point of the narrative versus where, if you're seeking the power, it's usually the kind of the point or goal of the plot.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah, I love those points. I love what all of you guys said, and I think too, like, so for me, I've written both in A Story Spun in Scarlet and this universe. It's very much, story crafters are born with their power, and it awakens at some point in their life, and then they typically will go to an academy and train, and then they receive a cloak that will reflect in color the amount of power that they have. And so I find it really fun to do the sort of inborn power, because you get to see sort of how having that from the moment that you're born, sort of like the gifted kid syndrome, if you've ever heard that, where it's like, when you're told from a young age that you're a gifted child and all this stuff, and how does that weigh on you? How does that affect your identity? If you never know who you are without this power, how does that shape how you see yourself, how you relate to the world? And I think that that's a really fun aspect of being born with power. But I also love the pursuit of power plots, and my Star Chaser saga is more like that, where it's, the magic is contained in jars, and there's a limited quantity of them. And so what are you willing to do for a power that anybody can possess? Like, how far are you willing to go for a power that anybody can have? So I think that they are very different, and they're both very, very fun.
I love all those answers. Okay, awesome. Does anyone else have a question?
I do.
Yes.
So I'm a teacher. I taught K-12 for 10 years. I now teach adults. So my question is, I have a lot of students when I do ask them to write. So the question for all of you is, how do you get over that fear, that initial fear of, this is my thing that I want to turn in, right? So a lot of times I see my student, they're like, just give it to me, okay? I corrected them, you're gonna see red marks. So, but there gonna be good stuff in there. So what would be like, how do you get over that fear and also encourage other young writers? Great question.
I'm gonna say something real quick, and I'll hand it down. I just wanna say that I struggle. I was that kid. I went to public school just 1 year, but I was very reluctant to share my writing with the class. I had never done anything like that before. And it was, I think that, honestly, the biggest thing for me was the way my teacher spoke into my life, and that she was like, reinforcing that it is okay to like make mistakes. Like, even full-fledged authors do it. There are typos in your most favorite published work that was picked up by a big 5 publishing house. But I remember her saying that, like, what is on the page is the truth of who you are. And a lot of times the fear that we have, I think, of sharing our work is not actually a fear of sharing our work, but a fear of sharing ourselves. And so sometimes I feel that knowing that I'm cared about and loved and feeling safe as a person makes me feel safer about sharing my writing. So sometimes I think it's honestly like relational. Like, if they trust you and they hear that from you, you're like, you know what you're saying matters and your voice matters. It takes some of the sting out of like the correction. It makes you better about sharing. So.
So I also was / still, I am this kid still. Like I think just a couple months ago, I was like, I don't want to let anyone see this. It's a really vulnerable thing to let people see. I feel like with writing specifically, it really does feel like putting your heart on a plate and like, here you go. Please don't stick a fork in it. But I think what helps me is as I've gotten better about sharing it with people despite being kind of afraid of it, it helps me to know that by making mistakes, I am learning not to make the mistake again. And you don't learn things by you have to make mistakes in order to learn how to do it the right way. As much as nobody likes hearing that ever. I think knowing all of your favorite authors, all of your favorite storytellers have had mistakes. They might still have mistakes in their published works helps. And then just fostering an environment where it's you're not in trouble if you mess up, you're not getting judged for it. We've all done it, we're all going to do it. Just knowing that by making mistakes is actually a good thing because you're improving each time.
Yeah, definitely agree with all those. I think a lot went into it to kind of get me to this point, but I think not being able to not compare yourself to other people, especially more seasoned authors and bigger named authors. I read a lot of Stephen King when I was middle school, high school kind of thing, and a lot of my writing was a lot like Stephen King's, what I was reading from him, and it wasn't great. It was my take on what I thought Stephen King was saying. So I had to break out of that in order to get here.
Wait, I have a question. You grew up in a Christian household and you're
Yes.
allowed to read Stephen King?
Yeah, it was a problem, but a lot of these changed really quickly, over the years. It was a turbulent time. But just being able to let go of that comparison and have the confidence to do your own thing. Chris from even probably 10 years ago wouldn't have the courage to be here selling at an outlet event. But once I let go of that comparison, that whole try to be like everybody else and just build the confidence in who you are, that's where you really start to shine. So.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
No, that was just a great question.
Yeah.
Answer.
Thank you.
So when I was in school, I didn't have any problem throwing my stories at classmates because my classmates gave me a lot of good feedback. It actually wasn't until I started trying to get feedback online for Odium, when I was trying to get workshop with people on other writing websites, and I got some really nasty words back on it. And it was actually, it took a long time for me to realize that there's a difference between criticism and critique, right? Because criticism is useless. That's the kind of thing that somebody says to you when they're just trying to tear you down. But critique is something that you use to get better. So that was the thing. And so when I still had a lot of anxiety when I published book 1, and I remember putting it out there and being like, oh my gosh, what if people tell me I suck? And then I was I had to remind myself, that's not critique, that's criticism, and you have to just let that go. It's useless to you. So that's what helped me.
Yeah, for me, and sounds like for everybody at this table, imposter syndrome is real, but it's also a lie that we tell ourselves too. I'll sell a book and then immediately have that panic moment, what if they don't like it, right?
Yeah.
Everybody? So it's just something that you have to feel confident enough to get over. I don't want to let go either at times, but that's just natural. I think maybe because I was older when I started this process, I just learned to not waste time with stuff that's useless, you said. Right? And just let it roll off my back. People are not gonna like what I write. People are not gonna like the theme. we live in a world that everybody has different opinions and aren't really willing to accept anybody else's as much anymore. So I don't choose to live in that world. My book is out there for whoever wants to give it a chance, and if you don't, great. There's so many other books out there and way more in the other room that you will like. So you just gotta let it go.
Awesome, that was such a good question.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I love that. Do you mind if I add one more thought?
Go for it.
I actually, just from like a practical standpoint, I think for me also, like I like when I'm critiquing things, I like to do the compliment sandwich method. So it's like, here's a good thing that you did. Here's something that needs some work. Here's another good thing that you did. And I think once you know that you're going to get positive feedback at the same, like you're gonna get negative feedback, but it doesn't feel as scary knowing that you're gonna get the good, like the good that you did too. So I think that gives them something to look forward to. So they might be a little bit less like, give it back, because they're gonna wanna see what you have to say.
Awesome. Well, I think that's sadly all we have time